She fed her children with her own milk until the age of 18, convinced it was the only way to protect them from the curse that had plagued her family for generations. Where are you listening to this story from right now? In your living room, while cooking, or maybe walking through your neighborhood? Wherever you are, make yourself comfortable, because the story I'm about to tell you will chill you to the bone. And if this story captivates you even half as much as it disturbed me when I discovered these forgotten archives, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Because after what you're about to hear about the Duroc family, you'll understand why some family secrets are best left buried forever. Autumn was particularly harsh that year in the Burgundy region. The golden leaves of the vineyard stretched as far as the eye could see around the Duroc shadow, falling one by one like silent tears upon the cobbled paths of the ancestral estate. At the heart of this seemingly idyllic landscape stood an imposing gray stone mansion, a silent witness to 3 centuries of family history. Marie-Thérèse Duroc, then 28 years old, stared through the window of her boudoir at the autumn scenery that eerily mirrored the state of her own family. A beautiful woman with chestnut hair and piercing blue eyes, she carried within her the weight of a secret that consumed her more with each passing day. Her right hand absent-mindedly caressed her rounded belly. She was pregnant with her 5th child, and the terror growing inside her only deepened as the months went by. Because Marie-Thérèse knew what no one else yet suspected. She had discovered, hidden deep within the family archives in the shadehouse cellar, a collection of documents that revealed the origin of the evil haunting the Duroc bloodline. Parish registers carefully concealed, letters from physicians, testimonies from servants, all pointed to one abominable truth. The Duroc family, respected throughout the region for its wealth and influence, was hiding a monstrous genealogical secret. Since the mid-17th century, consanguineous marriages had followed one after another in their lineage, not by accident or custom, but by cold, calculated greed. Marie-Thérèse's ancestors had deliberately married brothers to sisters, cousins to cousins, all for one reason: to keep the vast family fortune intact. Pierre-Auguste Duroc, the patriarch who founded this abominable tradition around 1650, was a ruthless, unscrupulous businessman. He had realized that dividing the inheritance among several branches would weaken the Duroc family's power and wealth. His solution was radical: to keep the bloodline pure by forcing his children to marry each other. The first incestuous union took place in 1671. Jean-Baptiste Duroc was married to his own sister, Marguerite. That unnatural union produced 3 children, 2 of whom already showed minor physical deformities: a clubfoot for the eldest, and a cleft lip for the younger daughter. But Pierre-Auguste dismissed these imperfections with a wave of his hand, blaming them on the whims of fate. Marie-Thérèse shuddered as she recalled the documents she had unearthed. The testimonies of the midwives of that era described increasingly difficult births, stillborn infants with deformed bodies, survivors afflicted with mental or physical disabilities. And yet the Duroc family had persisted, generation after generation, in this cursed path. Her own husband, Henry Louis Duroc, was in fact her first cousin. Their marriage, arranged by their respective parents when she was only 16, had been part of this same family tradition, one she had accepted back then without question. How could she have imagined the horror hidden behind what had been presented as respectable unions of convenience? The 4 children she had already brought into the world all bore the marks of this cursed inheritance. Paul, the eldest, 10 years old, suffered from severe mental deficiency, unable to speak properly or grasp the simplest ideas. Augustine, 8 years old, had a spinal deformity that gave her a limping, painful walk. The twins, Charles and Charlotte, aged 6, had both inherited a skin disease that covered their bodies with red, oozing patches. But what tormented Marie Therese the most was that, despite the obvious signs, her husband Henry Louis stubbornly refused to make the connection between their children's suffering and the family's practices. He preferred to blame the bad regional air, unhealthy humors, or even divine wrath rather than admit the truth staring him in the face. That evening, as the autumn wind moaned against the shadehouse shutters, Marie Therese made a decision that would forever alter the course of her family's history. She could no longer stay silent. She could no longer allow the curse to continue. The child she carried deserved better than this poisoned inheritance. She descended to the library, where Henry Louis was going through his property ledgers as he did every night after dinner. The 42-year-old man, his hair already graying and his face worn by a life of excess, barely looked up when his wife entered the room. "Henry Louis, we need to talk," she said in a trembling voice. "Can it wait, my dear? I have accounts to verify first." "No, it can't wait any longer," she interrupted, her tone firm enough to surprise him. "It's about our children, about the one I'm carrying, and all those who will come after us." Henry Louis finally set down his quill and looked at her, annoyed. "What do you mean?" Marie Therese approached him, clutching the documents she had found against her chest. "I found papers in the cellar, registers, letters. Henry Louis, do you really know who we are? Do you know what our ancestors did?" Her husband's face hardened instantly. "Where did you find those documents? You had no right to search the family archives without my permission." "So you did know," she exclaimed, her last doubts vanishing. "You knew about the marriages between brothers and sisters, about the inbreeding, about everything, and you said nothing." A heavy silence fell over the library. Henry Louis slowly stood, his imposing figure casting a threatening shadow on the paneled walls. "What you have discovered must never leave this house, Marie Therese. Never. Our family has survived 3 centuries thanks to these arrangements. Our fortune, our lands, our social standing. All of it exists because of the sacrifices of our ancestors." "Sacrifices?" Marie Therese let out a bitter laugh. "You call that sacrifices? Look at our children, Henry Louis. Look at Paul, he'll never live a normal life. Look at Augustine, who suffers every day. Look at the twins who hide because of their skin. Do you see their suffering? Do you understand what we've done to them?" Henry Louis walked around the desk, his face tightening with anger. "Our children are alive. They have a roof over their heads, food on their plates, a secure future. How many peasant families can say the same?" "But at what cost?" cried Marie Therese, tears streaming down her face. "At what cost?" The slap echoed through the silence of the library. Marie Therese held her cheek, stunned by the sudden violence of her husband. It was the first time he had ever struck her. "You will forget what you've discovered," he said coldly. "You will return those documents to where you found them, and we will never speak of this again. The child you carry will be born like the others, raised like the others, and continue our lineage. That is our destiny, Marie Therese. That is our duty." But Marie Therese, despite her aching cheek and her shattered heart, knew she could never forget. That night, as Henry Louis snored beside her, she caressed her belly and whispered a promise to the unborn child. "I will protect you, my little one. Whatever it costs me, I will break this curse." She had no idea that her promise would set in motion a chain of events that would one day expose the darkest genealogical secret in all of France. The spring of 1848 brought changes far beyond the walls of Château Duroc. Revolution was rumbling in Paris. The July monarchy had fallen, and the Second Republic was being born. But in the peaceful Burgundy countryside, those political upheavals felt distant, insignificant compared to the private tragedy unfolding within the Duroc family. In February, Marie Thérèse had given birth to a baby boy she named Alexander. Unlike her other children, the newborn seemed perfectly healthy, no deformities, no visible signs of the afflictions that had marked his brothers and sisters. That apparent normalcy should have comforted the young mother, but instead, it only deepened her unease. She knew too well that the effects of inbreeding didn't always appear right away. Dr. Emile Vacherin, the family physician who had attended the birth, observed the child with particular attention. A man of science, 55 years old, trained in Paris at the finest universities, he had. Dr. Emile Vacherin had long been intrigued by the many abnormalities he had observed among the Duroc children over the years. Though medical knowledge was still limited for the time, his training allowed him to suspect that these weren't coincidences. They were symptoms of something far more sinister. During his monthly checkup visit, Dr. Vacherin examined little Alexander carefully. At 3 months old, the baby cooed normally, followed objects with his eyes, and responded to stimuli. And yet, something about his development unsettled the physician. "Madame Duroc," he said quietly as he placed his instruments back into his worn leather case, "may I ask you a few questions about your family's medical history?" Marie Thérèse, rocking Alexander in her arms, felt her heart race. "What do you wish to know, doctor?" "I've noticed over the course of my visits that each of your children shows certain peculiarities. Paul with his difficulties in speech and comprehension, Augustine with her early spinal deformity, the twins with their chronic skin condition, and now Alexander, who appears healthy, yes, but whose development seems, how shall I put it, unusual." He settled into the armchair opposite her, his piercing eyes fixed on her face. "Are you aware of any hereditary illnesses in your family, or your husband?" Marie Thérèse hesitated. Since her confrontation with Henry Louis 6 months earlier, she had not dared to mention the family archives again. Her husband had ordered the cellar, the one where she had found the incriminating documents, sealed with bricks, under the pretense of humidity problems. Yet the revelations she had uncovered continued to haunt her every night. "Doctor," she began hesitantly, her voice trembling, "if I were to tell you something, under medical secrecy, would you be bound to silence?" Dr. Vacherin nodded gravely. "Of course, madame. Everything you tell me remains between us." Marie Thérèse took a deep breath, and then she told him everything. The documents she had found, the deliberate inbreeding that had persisted for 2 centuries, the deformities, the illnesses, the madness that stalked every generation of the Duroc line. Dr. Vacherin listened in silence, his expression growing darker as the full horror unfolded. "My God," he murmured when she finally stopped speaking. "Madame Duroc, what you are describing is systematic consanguinity, The consequences for the offspring can be catastrophic. I know, Marie Therese exclaimed, tears filling her eyes. But what can I do? How can I end this? How can I protect Alexander and all the children to come? The doctor rose and walked to the window, looking out over the Chateau gardens, where the Duroc children played under the watchful eye of their governess. Paul, though 10 years old, was playing with toys meant for toddlers, his mental delay preventing him from enjoying the games of his age. Augustine sat apart, watching her siblings with envy, her twisted spine making it impossible to run and play like them. The twins, Charles and Charlotte, wore long clothing despite the spring warmth, to hide the red, scaly patches that covered their skin. Dr. Vacherin turned back toward her. "We must act, Madame Duroc," he said firmly. "This cannot go on. Medical understanding is evolving, and we are beginning to grasp the true dangers of inbreeding." "But my husband refuses to listen," she said, lowering her head. "He calls it our destiny, our family duty. He even threatens to cast me out if I ever speak of it again." The doctor frowned. "And the others, your in-laws, the uncles, the aunts, are they all complicit or ignorant?" "Those who know stay silent. Those who don't prefer not to ask questions. The Duroc fortune buys a great deal of silence, doctor." A plan began to take shape in Vacherin's mind. He had contacts in Paris, fellow physicians, researchers studying hereditary diseases. Perhaps he could alert the authorities, maybe even bring the truth to light. But he also knew the Duroc family wielded considerable influence throughout the region. He would have to act carefully. "Madame Duroc," he said as he sat back down, "would you allow me to examine your children more thoroughly, to prepare a detailed medical report on their condition?" "To what end?" she asked. "To gather proof," he replied. "To document, scientifically, the effects of inbreeding within your family. Those records could one day be used to change everything." Marie Therese looked down at baby Alexander, who slept peacefully in her arms. "All right, doctor," she whispered, "but it must be done in secret. Henry Louis must not know." In the weeks that followed, Dr. Vacherin's visits to the Chateau became more frequent. Officially, he came to check on the infant's health and to treat the chronic ailments of the other children. In truth, he was methodically compiling a complete medical dossier on the Duroc family. What he recorded was terrifying. Paul not only suffered from severe mental retardation, but also from motor coordination issues and sporadic epileptic seizures. Augustine endured. Progressive scoliosis threatened to compromise her respiratory functions. The twins developed repeated skin infections, their weakened immune systems unable to effectively fight off pathogens. As for little Alexander, despite his normal appearance, he showed a slight delay in psychomotor development, enough to deeply worry the doctor. But the most disturbing revelation was yet to come. In June 1848, Marie Therese discovered she was pregnant again. The news terrified her to the point that she considered ending the pregnancy, a dangerous and illegal act at the time. Dr. Vacherin dissuaded her, promising to accompany her through this new ordeal. Henry Louis, on the other hand, received the news of this sixth pregnancy with satisfaction, seeing it as proof that his lineage would continue to prosper. He ignored his wife's inner torment and the doctor's growing concerns. To him, the ailments of his children were merely temporary trials, difficulties that their family wealth would eventually overcome. But the summer would bring its share of tragic revelations. While going through the regional medical archives, Dr. Vacherin discovered documents that shed new light on the Duroc family's history. Testimonies from 18th century physicians, autopsy reports, and letters exchanged between doctors. The truth was even more horrifying than Marie Therese had imagined. Not only had consanguineous marriages been repeated for 2 centuries, but they had also caused dozens of premature deaths, stillbirths, and suicides. The Duroc family was not merely marked by inbreeding, it was devoured by it. And perhaps the worst part was that some members of the family, fully aware of the consequences, had deliberately chosen to continue the practice, preferring to sacrifice the health of their descendants rather than see the family estate divided. At that moment, Dr. Vacherin understood this was no longer just a medical issue, but a scandal capable of shaking all of French society. He had to act quickly, before another generation of children paid the price for this hereditary madness. Autumn 1848 marked a decisive turning point in the Duroc affair. Dr. Vacherin had discreetly contacted several Parisian colleagues, sending them the evidence he had gathered. One of them, Dr. Jean-Martin Lefebvre, a specialist in hereditary diseases at the Hôpital de la Salpêtrière, became particularly interested in this textbook case of systematic inbreeding. Meanwhile, Marie Therese lived her pregnancy in utter anguish. The movements of the child she carried felt unlike her previous pregnancies, weaker, more erratic. Dr. Vacherin, who followed her closely, shared her fears but did not dare express them aloud. It was in this tense atmosphere that an unexpected event shook the fragile balance of the household. Marguerite Duroc, Henry Louis's younger sister, aged 38, returned to the family chateau after 15 years of absence. Marguerite had fled the estate on her 23rd birthday, flatly refusing the arranged marriage her parents had planned with her own cousin. She had settled in Lyon, where she married a local merchant, Jean-Baptiste Mollard, and led a quiet bourgeois life. The couple had 3 healthy children and prospered in the textile trade. But the recent death of her husband had left her a widow with young children, and financial troubles now forced her to seek help from her original family. Her return to the chateau was met with a mix of suspicion and curiosity from Henry Louis, who had never forgiven his sister's act of defiance. Marie Therese, however, immediately saw in Marguerite's arrival a potential ally, an intelligent, educated woman who had lived 15 years away from the family's toxic influence. Perhaps she could understand and help fight the Duroc curse. The reunion between the 2 sisters-in-law took place one October evening in the chateau's music room. Henry Louis had gone to inspect the vineyards with the steward, leaving the 2 women alone with the children. Marguerite, for the first time, saw the full extent of the damage caused by her family's practices. "My God, Marie Therese," she whispered, watching the children playing near the fireplace. "What has happened to them?" Marie Therese, 7 months pregnant and exhausted by anxiety, burst into tears. "They're all ill, Marguerite, all marked by our cursed inheritance." "What are you talking about?" Marie Therese then told her sister-in-law everything she had discovered the previous year. The inbreeding, the hidden archives, the devastating consequences on the family's descendants. Marguerite listened in growing horror, recalling the pressure she herself had faced in her youth to marry her cousin. "I was right to run away," she said in a trembling voice. "I felt it instinctively." "I always knew something was wrong with this family," Marguerite said softly, "but I never imagined, not to this extent." "Then you believe me," whispered Marie Therese. "You understand why I have to act." Marguerite took her sister-in-law's trembling hands in hers. "Of course I believe you, and you're right to act. My 3 children are healthy because I married a man with no blood ties to our family. Look at the difference." That conversation marked the beginning of a secret alliance between the two women. Drawing on her experience of the outside world and her connections in Lyon, Marguerite agreed to help Marie Therese fight against the family's toxic traditions. She began discreetly contacting lawyers she knew, inquiring about possible legal actions against such practices. But Henry Louis soon grew suspicious of the complicity between his wife and his sister. One November evening, he caught them deep in conversation in the library, hunched over documents Marguerite had brought from Lyon. His rage exploded with terrifying violence. "What is the meaning of this farce?" he roared, snatching the papers from their hands. "Marguerite, you haven't set foot in this house for 15 years, and now you return only to sow discord. And you, Marie Therese, have I not been clear on this matter?" "Henry Louis, listen to us," pleaded Marguerite. "We can no longer close our eyes to what is happening in this family. Look at your children." "My children are perfectly fine," he shouted, but his voice lacked conviction. "Oh, really?" Marguerite retorted, her tone sharp and fearless, a side of her that Marie Therese had never seen. "Paul is 10 years old and still can't read or speak properly. Augustine suffers more every day from her twisted spine. The twins scratch themselves until they bleed because their skin burns constantly. And you call that fine?" Henry Louis slammed his fist on the desk so hard that the inkwell overturned, spilling black liquid across the papers. "Silence, you understand nothing," he roared. "Our family has survived 3 centuries because of the decisions of our ancestors. We are rich, influential, respected." "And cursed," cried Marie Therese, pushed beyond her limits. "We are cursed, Henry Louis. How many more children must pay the price for your pride?" A heavy silence followed, then a sound, a stifled moan. Marie Therese suddenly clutched her stomach, her face contorted in pain. "Something's wrong," she gasped. "The baby." Marguerite rushed to her side, while Henry Louis stood frozen, his expression shifting from anger to panic. "Quick, fetch Dr. Vacherin," cried Marguerite. The doctor arrived less than an hour later, but it was already too late. Marie Therese had miscarried. The child she carried was gone. The shock of the argument, the stress of the past months, the relentless anxiety, all had culminated in tragedy. While the doctor tended to Marie Therese, Marguerite pulled Henry Louis aside. "Do you see now what your obsession has caused? Your wife just lost her child because of the pressure you've put on her." For the first time, Henry Louis seemed shaken. The loss of this child pierced something deep within him. It's not my fault," he stammered. "Then whose fault is it?" Marguerite fired back. "Marie Therese's, because she refuses to watch her children suffer, Dr. Vacherin for trying to help them, or mine because I dared to return and prove that another life is possible." At that moment, Dr. Vacherin joined them in the corridor, his face grave. "Madame Duroc is resting now," he said softly. "But she has lost a great deal of blood. It will take time, both physical and emotional, for her to recover." He turned to Henry Louis, looking him straight in the eye. "Monsieur Duroc, I believe it is time we had an honest conversation. I have served as your family's physician for 10 years. I have watched your children grow, and what I see deeply troubles me." Henry Louis opened his mouth to protest, but the doctor silenced him with a raised hand. "Please let me finish. I have contacts in Paris, colleagues who specialize in hereditary diseases. They are interested in your family's case, not to expose you but to understand and perhaps to help." "Contacts in Paris?" Henry Louis's voice turned cold, almost threatening. "What exactly have you told them?" "The medical truth, Monsieur Duroc. Nothing more, nothing less." Henry Louis clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. Marguerite quickly stepped between them. "Henry Louis, stop. Can't you see the doctor is trying to help your children?" "My children need no help," he barked, "and certainly not from some Parisian physicians who know nothing about our family." Dr. Vacherin exhaled heavily, his patience nearly gone. "Then allow me to ask you one question, Monsieur Duroc," he said quietly. "If you had to choose between preserving your fortune and saving the lives of your children, which would you choose?" The question hung in the air like smoke, illuminated by the flickering candle flames that lined the dark corridor. Henry Louis said nothing, but his silence spoke volumes. That night, as Marie Therese lay weak and pale, recovering from her miscarriage, Marguerite made a decision, one that would set in motion the events to come. That night, Marguerite wrote a long letter to her contacts in Lyon, asking them to forward the information to the proper authorities. It was time. The Duroc affair had to come out of the shadows. The winter of 1849 was the harshest the region had seen in decades. But the cold that filled the corridors of the Chateau had little to do with the weather outside. Henry Louis had stopped speaking to his sister altogether and addressed his wife only when necessary. The family atmosphere had become unbearable, heavy with tension and silence. The children, sensing the hostility between the adults, grew more and more restless. Paul suffered several violent epileptic seizures. Augustine complained constantly of back pain. The twins developed such severe skin infections that Dr. Vacherin had to treat them with ointments specially imported from Paris. As for little Alexander, now a year old, his developmental delays had become impossible to ignore. He still could not sit up on his own and made no attempt to articulate any sounds. When Dr. Vacherin examined him, he also detected heart irregularities that filled him with dread. "We must act now," he told Marguerite during one of their secret meetings. "These children need specialized care I cannot provide here. And above all, we must prevent more children from being born under these cursed conditions." "I've already written to Lyon and Paris," Marguerite replied. "My contacts assure me the case has reached the highest medical authorities, but we still lack tangible proof, testimonies, documents. The papers Marie Therese found, Henry Louis destroyed them. He sealed off the cellar and claimed the documents were ruined by damp." Dr. Vacherin paused, deep in thought. "There may be other sources, parish records, notarial archives. If this practice has lasted 2 centuries, there must be traces elsewhere." And thus began a clandestine investigation, led by Marguerite and Dr. Vacherin. They contacted parish priests from neighboring villages, consulted notarial archives, and discreetly questioned the oldest inhabitants of the area. What they uncovered exceeded their darkest fears. Not only had consanguineous marriages been perpetuated since the 18th century, but they had led to dozens of hidden tragedies: stillbirths buried in secret, suicides disguised as accidents, and the mentally ill locked away in distant asylums. Then came a breakthrough. Father Augustin Morrow, the priest of St. Martin Parish and the oldest cleric in the region, finally agreed to speak. At 70 years old, he had served the area for over 4 decades and knew the secrets of every local family. The Durocs, he sighed when Marguerite came to see him. I have always refused to celebrate their marriages. Madame Mollard, forgive me. I still think of you as Mademoiselle Duroc, but my predecessors lacked that courage. The Duroc money spoke louder than the voice of God. Father Morrow, she asked gently, would you be willing to testify officially? The old priest looked long and hard at this woman who so resembled her brother, Henry Louis, yet carried a strength he had never seen in any member of that cursed bloodline. If it can save innocent children from this lineage, he said at last, then yes, I will testify. But do you realize what you are setting in motion? The Durocs will not take this lightly. They have powerful friends and high-placed allies. I know, Father, Marguerite replied steadily, but we can no longer stay silent. At that same moment in Paris, Dr. Jean-Martin Lefebvre presented the Duroc file before a committee of eminent physicians at the Académie de Médecine. The case both fascinated and horrified them. Never before had science been presented with such a pure and tragic example of the effects of systematic inbreeding. Gentlemen, declared Dr. Lefebvre to the assembly, we have before us a unique opportunity, not only to study the biological effects of consanguinity across generations, but also to fulfill a moral duty, to intervene and protect the living and future children of this family. The president of the Academy, Dr. Alexander Morrow, nodded gravely. Dr. Lefebvre, he said, you have our full authorization to pursue this investigation. You will have every support necessary, even, if required, from the judicial authorities. The noose was tightening around the Duroc family, though Henry Louis still had no idea. He continued to live in his château like an arrogant lord of the old regime, convinced that his wealth and influence would shield him forever from the consequences of his sins. He did not know that, at that very moment, his sister Marguerite was writing a letter that would change everything. A formal denunciation addressed to the prosecutor of the Republic in Dijon, accusing the Duroc family of their hereditary crimes and requesting a judicial investigation to protect the surviving children. That night, as she slipped the letter beneath her pillow, Marguerite couldn't help but think of Marie Thérèse sleeping in the next room, pale and weak from her miscarriage, but at last relieved of the burden of carrying another doomed child. She was already condemned in advance. Tomorrow, that letter would be sent to Dijon, and with it would begin the fall of the Duroc Empire. At dawn on March 15, 3 official carriages rolled up the cobblestone drive of Château Duroc. The public prosecutor of Dijon, Maître François Beaumont, arrived with 2 examining magistrates and 4 gendarmes to conduct a formal search. Marguerite's letter, supported by Dr. Vacherin's collected testimonies and the Parisian medical reports, had triggered an unprecedented judicial investigation. Henry Louis, startled awake by the pounding at the front door, came downstairs in his dressing gown to greet the unexpected visitors. His face shifted from irritation to disbelief as he recognized who they were. Monsieur Henry Louis Duroc, asked the prosecutor in a solemn tone. I am he. What is the meaning of this? We have a search warrant concerning serious allegations brought to our attention, accusations of endangerment and complicity in practices contrary to public order. Henry Louis felt the blood drain from his face. I don't understand what you're talking about. We're talking about the systematic incestuous marriages within your family for the past 2 centuries, Monsieur Duroc, and their devastating consequences on your children. The master of the house swayed slightly, gripping the doorframe for support. Who made these accusations? You'll learn that in due time, replied the prosecutor. For now, we must seize all family documents, registers, correspondence, genealogical archives, and wills. From the top of the staircase, Marguerite had been silently watching. Then she descended, her steps echoing in the grand hall. Gentlemen, she said calmly, I am Marguerite Duroc, sister of Monsieur Henry Louis. It was I who brought this matter before the court. The look her brother gave her was pure venom, hatred distilled to its essence. You, he hissed, you dared. I did my duty, she replied firmly, the duty you've refused to face for years. What followed was a nightmare for Henry Louis. The magistrates searched the shade down methodically, and despite all his precautions, they unearthed several caches containing incriminating evidence. In the library, behind a false wall, they found clandestine parish registers, records kept by a complicit priest at the order of Pierre-Auguste Duroc in the 17th century. In the attics, hidden beneath heavy tarps, a ghastly discovery awaited them. A collection of small coffins of every size, dozens of them, bearing silent witness to the premature deaths that haunted the family's history. Each coffin had a nameplate, engraved with a first name and a date, revealing the scale of the generational tragedy. My God, murmured one magistrate, staring in horror at the secret necropolis. How many children have died because of this madness? Dr. Vacherin, summoned as a medical expert, examined the hidden mortuary records. According to these documents, gentlemen, he declared gravely, we can estimate that more than 60 children have died prematurely within this family over the past 2 centuries. Stillbirths, infant deaths, suicides of adolescents. Marie Therese, called to testify, told her story before the magistrates, her discovery of the archives the previous year, her desperate attempts to warn her husband, the threats she had endured, and her recent miscarriage. She spoke in a monotone voice, detached, her eyes hollow and distant. Madame Duroc, the prosecutor asked gently, why didn't you alert the authorities sooner? I was afraid, she admitted. Afraid for my children, afraid for myself. My husband told me that if I ever spoke, he'd have me locked away as insane. And who would have believed me? The Durocs are respected in this region. They have influence. That influence will no longer protect them, said the magistrate firmly. Justice will be served. But Henry Louis hadn't said his last word. The very next day, he called upon his powerful Parisian contacts, lawyers, politicians, financiers. His immense wealth still opened many doors, and he was determined to smother the affair before it destroyed him. Maître Edouard de Clermont-Tonnerre, a renowned Parisian lawyer known for defending noble families in their most scandalous trials, agreed to represent him. A man of 60, hardened by decades of legal and political intrigues, he devised a bold defense strategy. My client, he pleaded before the Dijon court, is the victim of a family conspiracy, a plot orchestrated by a jealous and vindictive sister, aided by an ambitious doctor seeking fame. The Duroc family marriages have always respected the laws of their time. That some unions were contracted between cousins is nothing exceptional in the French aristocracy. Maître, interrupted the presiding judge, we are not speaking of distant cousins here, but of unions between brothers and sisters, between uncles and nieces. practices forbidden by both church and law. "Prove it. Prove it," retorted the lawyer. "Where are the direct witnesses to these supposed incestuous unions? Where is the formal proof? All we have are rumors, assumptions, and documents whose authenticity could easily be questioned." Maître de Clermontaine's strategy was clear. He would not deny the health problems plaguing the Duroc children. Instead, he would blame them on environmental causes. The dampness of the Chateau, the quality of the local water, outbreaks of disease, anything but inbreeding. He portrayed Henry Louis as a loving father, victim of a smear campaign orchestrated by jealous relatives eager to destroy his success. But Dr. Lefebvre and his Parisian medical team had prepared their counterattack well. They presented a detailed scientific study comparing the Duroc family tree with that of several local families. The statistics were devastating. The infant mortality rate among the Durocs was 4 times higher than average. The rate of physical and mental deformities was 6 times higher. "Gentlemen of the court," declared Dr. Lefebvre firmly, "we are witnessing a textbook case of hereditary degeneration caused by centuries of inbreeding. Modern science allows us today to understand and prove what our predecessors could only guess at. This family has practiced incest for 200 years, and their children are paying the price." The most moving testimony came from Father Moreau, the elderly priest who had served in the region for over 40 years. Despite his frail health and 70 years of age, he came personally to the courtroom. "I have seen so many of the Duroc children die," he said in a trembling voice. "Newborns with malformed hearts, adolescents who took their own lives rather than live with their burden. I refused to bless those cursed unions, but money spoke louder than the voice of God." Henry Louis sat in the courtroom, watching the edifice of lies his family had built crumble piece by piece. Yet he still held one last weapon: corruption. That night, in the privacy of his lawyer's office, Maître de Clermont received a discreet visit from several influential figures. Enormous sums of money changed hands. Promises were made. Thinly veiled threats were whispered. The next day, several key witnesses for the prosecution mysteriously withdrew their statements, claiming memory errors or confusion. But Marguerite and Dr. Vacherin were not so easily defeated. They had anticipated this corruption attempt and prepared a backup dossier containing testimonies gathered far beyond the Duroc family's influence. Lionized doctors who had treated former servants of the Chateau, priests from distant parishes who had heard the confessions of shepherds and traveling merchants. The noose tightened inexorably around Henry Louis. But the final blow came from where he least expected it: his own children. Paul, the eldest, now 11 years old, was examined by a specialized medical commission from Paris. Despite his mental handicap, he managed to express, in simple words, the suffering he endured every day. Augustine 10 testified to her chronic pain and the worsening of her spinal deformity. The twins, Charles and Charlotte, aged 8, showed the doctors their open sores that never fully healed. As for little Alexander, 15 months old, examinations revealed severe cardiac malformations that threatened his life. Dr. Lefebvre estimated he would not live past his 10th birthday without constant, expensive care. "This, gentlemen, is the true face of the Duroc family," thundered the prosecutor in his closing statement. "Children sacrificed on the altar of greed and family pride. How many more must suffer for this hereditary madness?" On June 15, 1849, the Dijon tribunal delivered its verdict. Henry Louis Duroc was found guilty of endangering the lives of others and complicity in practices contrary to public morality. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison and stripped of parental authority. His vast fortune was placed under judicial administration, and his children were entrusted to his sister, Marguerite. When the verdict was read, Henry Louis collapsed completely. The man who had ruled like an old-world lord over his family and lands watched his empire crumble in seconds. His wealth, his social standing, his family, everything was slipping away. But the worst was yet to come. The Duroc affair, once confined to the walls of a single shaidow, now burst into the public sphere, shocking France and exposing one of the darkest genealogical secrets in its history. That summer of 1849 marked the Duroc case's entry into French criminal legend. The trial, widely reported by both Parisian and regional newspapers, fascinated and horrified the public alike. Journalists reveled in the tale of a cursed family, part Greek tragedy, part sordid Gothic horror. Readers devoured every new revelation. Le Journal des Débats, Le Constitutional, and La Presse competed to publish the most sensational details, each releasing long investigative pieces tracing the Duroc genealogy. A bloodline that had finally damned itself in the eyes of France. The aftermath of the Duroc affair. Following the testimonies and medical analyses, the Duroc affair grew far beyond a mere scandal. It became a national obsession, a mirror held up to the French aristocracy, forcing it to confront the decaying legacy of inbreeding and pride. Dr. Jean-Martin Lefebvre, now a reluctant celebrity, was invited to lecture at leading medical schools across Europe. His groundbreaking study on the Duroc bloodline became a cornerstone of modern medical thought, a chilling example forever recorded in textbooks under the pseudonym Monsieur Luc. He became the living symbol of the dangers of systematic consanguinity. Meanwhile, Marguerite, newly granted guardianship of the Duroc children, moved into the chateau with her own family. The change was immediate and astonishing. Gone was the oppressive, unhealthy air that had once suffocated those halls under Henry Louis's rule. Marguerite ordered the rooms aired out, hired new servants, and brought modern standards of hygiene and nutrition. She summoned Europe's best physicians to care for the children. Paul, the eldest, was entrusted to a pioneering institute in Lyon, developing new educational methods for mentally challenged children. Augustine received a revolutionary orthopedic corset crafted by a German surgeon. The twins, Charles and Charlotte, were treated by a Swiss dermatologist who finally managed to stabilize their chronic skin conditions. And little Alexander, whose heart defect had seemed fatal, was kept under constant medical supervision, and against all expectations, began to recover. Even Marie-Thérèse, freed from her husband's tyranny, slowly rediscovered a taste for life. Years of crushing guilt began to lift as she saw her children's health improve. For the first time in years, hope returned to the chateau. But the world outside was less forgiving. The name Duroc had become synonymous with disgrace. Former friends vanished, merchants refused their business, artisans declined to set foot on their estate. "We have become outcasts," Marguerite murmured one autumn evening in 1849, gazing over the abandoned vineyards, deserted for lack of laborers willing to serve the cursed family. "Perhaps that is justice," replied Marie-Thérèse softly, "but our children do not deserve to bear this punishment." Then came the cruel winter of 1849-1850, bringing new tragedy. In his cell at the Dijon prison, Henry Louis Duroc descended into madness and despair. His lawyers pleaded for leniency on grounds of mental collapse, but public opinion was merciless. The man who had sacrificed his children upon the altar of greed and pride deserved no pity. In February, grim news reached the Château. Henry Louis was dead, officially from a sudden illness, though whispers of poisoning and suicide circulated in Dijon's cafes and salons. His death stirred no grief. Even his family, long past forgiveness, felt only grim relief. With the patriarch gone, Marguerite assumed leadership of the Duroc line and set out to redeem its name. Her first act was a public declaration in France's national newspapers. She and all surviving descendants swore never again to practice consanguineous marriage. Her second act was the creation of a charitable foundation dedicated to medical research on hereditary diseases. A vast portion of the Duroc fortune was donated to hospitals and institutions caring for handicapped children. Dr. Vacherin, appointed head physician of the foundation, devoted the rest of his career to studying the effects of inbreeding and developing treatments for genetic disorders. Funded by the Duroc fortune, his research became a cornerstone of the newborn field of genetic medicine. And yet the curse of the Durocs seemed unwilling to die. In 1852, little Alexander, despite constant care, suffered a sudden cardiac arrest. He was only 4 years old. His death shattered Marie Therese. "This is my punishment," she sobbed. "I carried him knowing the truth about our family. I condemned him before he was born." Marguerite tried to console her. "You are not the guilty one. It is Henry Louis and all our ancestors before him who bear the blame. You did everything humanly possible to save your children." But Marie Therese could not forgive herself. Consumed by remorse, she retreated into obsessive prayer, seeking in God the forgiveness she could not find within. The end of the Duroc line. In the chapel of the Château, Marie Therese spent her days imploring divine forgiveness for the sins of her bloodline. The year 1853 brought new trials. Augustine, now 13, saw her scoliosis worsen drastically despite every effort and treatment. Her spine twisted more and more, compressing her vital organs and making it increasingly difficult to breathe. The doctors had no hope left. Paul, on the other hand, had made remarkable progress at the specialized institute in Lyon. Though his mental faculties remained limited, he had gained a form of independence. He could now read simple texts, write his name, and perform basic arithmetic. More importantly, his emotional stability had improved. The violent epileptic fits had become rare. The twins, Charles and Charlotte, were blossoming at last. Their skin condition, though not fully cured, had been greatly reduced thanks to the Swiss treatments. But the true transformation was within. They had regained a sense of confidence that their father had long crushed. Bright and inquisitive, they were quickly catching up in their studies under skilled tutors. Then, in 1855, Marguerite made a decision that would mark the symbolic end of the Duroc curse. She ordered the demolition of an entire wing of the Château, the one that had housed the nuptial chamber where incestuous unions had been consummated for over 2 centuries. In its place, she had a monument built in honor of the children who had died because of the family's inbreeding, a marble slab engraved with solemn words. May their suffering not be in vain, and may their names never be forgotten. The inauguration ceremony, attended by Dr. Vacherin, Dr. Lefevre, and many notable medical and judicial figures, marked the rebirth of the Duroc family. For the first time in generations, their name was linked not with scandal and shame, but with redemption and compassion. Yet the genetic curse was not done. In 1857, Augustine died at the age of 17 from the final complications of her disease. Despite every effort, her deformed body could no longer fight against the relentless constriction of her lungs. Marie Thérèse, powerless before her daughter's slow agony, descended into mystical madness. She became convinced that God Himself was punishing her personally for the sins of her ancestors. Her faith turned into self-torture. She began inflicting painful acts of penance upon herself, day after day. Eventually, Marguerite had no choice but to have her committed to a specialized asylum in Paris, where she died 3 years later, consumed by guilt and grief. The 3 surviving children, Paul, Charles, and Charlotte, now bore the full weight of the Duroc legacy. Under the kind and steady protection of their Aunt Marguerite, they grew up in an environment that was finally healthy and loving, though forever shadowed by the marks of their cursed origin. In 1865, when the twins reached adulthood, Marguerite convened a solemn family gathering in the Château's Grand Library. Paul, now 27, sat quietly beside Charles and Charlotte, both 23 handsome young adults, scarred yet strong from their painful upbringing. "My dear nephews," Marguerite began, her voice trembling with emotion, "you are the last of the Duroc line. Upon your shoulders rests the choice to redeem our name or to let it die." She opened an old mahogany desk and placed upon the table a thick dossier bound in faded leather. "These are the documents I've gathered, the testimonies, the medical reports, 2 centuries of shame. I give them to you so that you may understand where you come from and decide who you wish to be." Charles, the more expressive of the twins, spoke first. "Aunt Marguerite, we have already decided. Charlotte and I will never marry, nor will Paul. We are the last, and with us, the cursed bloodline of the Durocs will end." Marguerite's eyes filled with tears. "That is a noble choice," she whispered, "but are you certain you wish to carry this burden alone?" Charlotte, who bore a haunting resemblance to her late mother, with the same chestnut hair and piercing blue eyes, nodded firmly. "We saw Alexander die. We saw Augustine suffer. We watched our mother lose her mind. We will not risk passing that pain to any child. The curse will end with us." Paul, struggling with his speech but determined, managed to say slowly, "Me too, no children, never." That decision, born of conscience and unity, marked the true end of the Duroc dynasty. The last heirs had chosen, with full awareness, to break the hereditary chain that had condemned their blood for generations. Deeply moved by their strength and selflessness, Marguerite formally bequeathed them the family fortune, with one clear mission: to transform this cursed inheritance into a force for healing and reparation. Charles went on to become the redemption of the Duroc line. Charles became a generous philanthropist, funding children's hospitals throughout France. Charlotte devoted herself to the education of disabled children, founding specialized schools that revolutionized care for mental and physical impairments. Paul, despite his limitations, became a beloved figure within these institutions. His simple kindness and gentle spirit brought immeasurable comfort to suffering children. As the years passed, the name Duroc slowly acquired a new meaning, no longer that of accursed lineage, but of benefactors devoted to the welfare of vulnerable children. The ancient scandals were never completely erased from collective memory, yet they were gradually overshadowed by the charitable works of the family's last descendants. In 1889, 40 years after the trial that had exposed the family's darkest secret, Dr. Vacherin, now a 75-year-old man, published his medical memoirs. An entire chapter was devoted to the Duroc affair. He wrote, "This family has taught us that the sins of the fathers do, indeed, fall upon the children, but also that courage and determination can break the chains of fate. The last of the Durocs chose to sacrifice their lineage to save the future. This voluntary sacrifice remains one of the most beautiful examples of redemption I have ever witnessed." Paul died on January 1, 1895, at the age of 57, taken by pneumonia. Despite his frailty, he had lived far longer than any doctor had predicted. Surrounded by the love of the children, he helped daily in the institutions founded by his family. Charlotte followed in 1902, aged 60, after a slow and painful battle with cancer that she bore with remarkable dignity. Even as her strength faded, she continued to oversee her schools, refusing to let illness interrupt her mission. Charles, the last survivor, lived until 1910. At his death, at the age of 70, he bequeathed the entirety of the Duroc fortune to a foundation bearing the names of all the children of Duroc who had died prematurely across the centuries. The Shrouded was transformed into a hospital specializing in genetic diseases, and the surrounding lands were sold to fund medical research. With Charles's passing, the Duroc bloodline was extinguished forever. Yet their name did not vanish. It remains engraved on the facades of hospitals, schools, and research institutes across Europe. A name that now evokes hope and healing, rather than curse and death. The old nuptial chamber of the Shrouded, where generations of forbidden unions had once taken place, was turned into a document archive dedicated to the study of the dangers of consanguinity. Medical students from around the world still visit it today to study the Duroc case, now a classic example of hereditary degeneration in genetic textbooks. In 1910, after Charles's death, a second inscription was added beneath the marble monument Marguerite had raised decades earlier in memory of the lost children. Here ends the story of the Duroc family. May their voluntary sacrifice inspire future generations. And may pride and greed never again triumph over the love of children. At Charles Duroc's funeral, Dr. Jean-Martin Lefebvre, by then one of Europe's most eminent geneticists, delivered the eulogy before an audience of scientists, doctors, and representatives of the charitable institutions funded by the family. He declared, "Charles Duroc takes with him the final secret of his accursed lineage, but leaves behind an inheritance far greater than all the treasures his ancestors amassed. The proof that humanity can triumph over its own errors when it finds the courage to face the truth." Even today, more than a century later, the name Duroc continues to resonate through Europe's medical circles, not as the name of a cursed family, but as that of involuntary pioneers of modern genetics and selfless benefactors of mankind. The 1849 trial archives, preserved in the Côte d'Or departmental records, draw hundreds of researchers, historians, and students each year. The story of this family remains one of the most striking examples of how ignorance, pride, and greed can destroy human lives, but also how willpower, courage, and love can transform even the darkest legacy. The last of the Durocs proved that redemption is possible, even for the most damned of bloodlines. Today, the Château Duroc, now a specialized hospital, still welcomes children suffering from rare genetic diseases. In its grand entrance hall hangs a large painting depicting Paul, Charles, and Charlotte Duroc. Beneath a final inscription: to those who chose to break the chains of the past, to offer a future to the children of tomorrow. May their example guide our steps toward the light. Thus ends the dreadful history of the Duroc family. Not in darkness, but in hope. A story that reminds us that behind every family secret may lie unspeakable suffering, but also the enduring possibility of redemption. That true love can triumph over even the oldest of curses. This story, long hidden in the dusty archives of French justice, teaches us an eternal lesson. It is through the choices we make when confronted with the heaviest of inheritances that our true humanity is revealed. The last of the Duroc family chose light over darkness, love over tradition, and the future over the past. Their voluntary sacrifice will forever remain one of the most beautiful examples of redemption ever known in French history. And their name, once synonymous with curse and shame, now evokes hope, proving that even the darkest secrets can be transformed into a source of healing when faced with courage and love. Thus ends the horrifying yet uplifting story of the Duroc family, the genealogical secret that haunted France for centuries before becoming a symbol of hope and redemption. If this story moved you as deeply as it did me when I unearthed these forgotten archives, don't hesitate to share it and subscribe to the channel to uncover more buried secrets from our past. For, as the last Durocs taught us, only by facing our shadows can we finally walk toward the light.